I'm going to show you how you can sew my new Darcy skirt, which is my new sewing pattern. I think it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever made. It is of course inspired by historical fashion. It has my standard V-shaped waistline, which I am absolutely in love with. I made a skirt last year for a costume for the masked ball in Versailles, and that skirt did really well on social media and everyone wanted to buy it, but it's such a large amount of fabric, so I couldn't really sell it. I decided to draft an entirely new pattern so that everyone can make it at home. One of the things I really wanted to do is to make it more customizable for everyone to wear. You can make this skirt 2 ways. One of the ways is how I like to make it, which is that the skirt is made in kind of 2 different pieces and are not attached at the top of the skirt, but just has 2 strings so you can tie it around your waist. I think it's a very fun and versatile way to make the skirt customizable for everyone. Firstly, you're going to pick your size. If you're going to make it with the drawstrings and not a zipper, I would recommend to choose 1 size up, or a size up if you're in between sizes, so that the panels here will overlap nicely and that you won't get a gap like this. Then you are going to print your pattern pieces. First, you have to assemble the pattern. You do this by matching up the coordinates in the top of the page. I'm going to use this beautiful green fabric. It is very important that you don't mix up the front and the back piece of the skirt, because the front piece is made a little bit differently to make up for the V shape of the yoke. Now you're going to start to sew your skirt, and I start by joining the front pieces, which is also known as the yoke. If you are using a fabric that has a right side and wrong sides, it's always important to sew the right sides together, and I do this with all the 8 pattern pieces for the yoke. Now you're just going to iron all the seams flat. Now you should have all the yoke pieces sewn together, and we're going to start working on the main piece of the skirt. Now we're going to ruffle the skirt, and you do this by sewing with a long stitch length all around the curve at the top. As you can see, I'm working with a fabric that frays a lot, and I think it's a little bit easier if you create 2 lines to gather with. So I'm going to sew a centimeter down as well from the first line. You have to do this on both the front and the back piece of the skirt. Now we're going to sandwich the skirt piece in between the yoke pieces, and we're going to start by the front with the V turned upwards. You're going to find the middle of the skirt, and I'm going to just pin that down. The skirt is going to be gathered all around, so I'm just going to start to pull the 2 gathering threads. And we're just going to pin the skirt piece to the yoke piece and distributing the ruffles nicely. I usually start 1 centimeter in from the edge to start ruffling. Now that you've sewn one of the sides, I'm going to take the other yoke piece and fasten it to the other side like this. And now you're just going to sew on top of the other seam, and this time you will have to make sure that it creates a very nice V at the front. And now that both sides are sewn, you can just pull out the gathering thread. After you've sewn the yoke to the skirt piece, you are just going to iron down. Just be careful not to iron directly on the ruffles. If you want to, you can cut a little bit off the inside seam if you're working with a fabric that frays a lot, especially on the V right here. Now your skirt is going to look like this, and you're just going to repeat what we did on the front, on the back piece as well, and that will leave you with 2 pieces looking like this. This for the back and this for the front. Now we are going to attach the ribbons to the skirt, and I'm going to use a nice pre-cut bias ribbon, which is the easiest way to do it, but you can of course create your own bias tape if you want to. For the front, you're going to measure the V right here and cut a little bit extra so that you have enough bias tape. It's a little bit easier if you just iron this in half first. To create the very nice V shape at the front, you are going to find the middle of the tape and you're going to sew a very small dart right here. If you are using another color on the bias tape, you have to switch your thread color to a color that matches the bias tape and not the skirt. I am just going to cut a little bit of the edge and you're just going to press this seam flat here. So now it's going to look like this and we are going to attach it to the front V line right here, which I think is absolutely adorable. The most important thing here is that you match up the seam on the ribbon to the seam of the yoke, and I will just lay it on top in the middle of the yoke and skirt piece. And you're just going to sew right here across the edge. And now you're just going to stitch here as well. The piece over the ruffles is a little bit harder, so that's why I always stitch at the top first. And you just have to be a little bit careful so that the ruffles gather nicely under the stitch line. And now your beautiful skirt is going to look like this, and you're just going to repeat the same thing on the back piece as well, but without creating the V right here. Now you're going to finish off this edge however you want. I'm going to overlock it, but you can of course zigzag stitch it or just fold it a couple of times so that the skirt doesn't have any raw edges on the side. If you have a machine that doesn't handle very thick fabrics, you can finish these edges off before you sew on the ribbon right here. Now we're going to attach the top ribbon to be able to close the skirt, and to measure out this ribbon you're just going to take your bias tape and put it around your waist. This skirt I'm making for my friend, so I'm just going to measure her waist. It has to be long enough to tie around your entire waist on both the front and the back piece. Firstly, you have to fold all the edges 1 centimeter in on all the 4 sides of the skirt pieces and iron it down. This is mostly important to do at the top, and if it's a little bit hard to close, you can always stitch here to make it close permanently. You're going to fold the ribbon in half and mark the middle, and you're just going to attach the bias tape like normal by pinning it to the front and sewing right along this line here. When you sew this bias tape on the top, you have to make sure that this edge here is closed so that it looks much nicer when the skirt is closed. Now you can trim the skirt part a little bit to make it easier to fold. Now you are going to fold the bias tape over and pin it down from the front. To finish off the edges, you are just going to fold it inside. Do this on the back piece of the skirt as well. Now you can just iron this ribbon a little bit to make it more neat. Now we are going to sew the sides of the skirt together, and you are going to do this by placing the back and front piece right side together and measuring down from the top. This measurement will vary a little bit depending on which size you are making. Now you are going to pin it together and sew from where you marked down the side of the skirt. Now you are going to sew this entire very long ruffled part for the bottom of the skirt, and you are just going to do this by stitching all the pieces that you cut out together, right side to right side, and then you're going to iron the seam and finish it with either zigzag or overlock, or you can also do French seams if you want to. This piece is very, very long and you are going to create one big loop. So it's very important when you stitch it together at the last seam that you make sure that it's not twisted at all. Now you are going to finish off the top seam of the ruffle piece, and you're also going to finish off the bottom seam of the skirt piece. You can do this by just using a normal zigzag stitch or overlocking like I'm doing. In addition to finishing off the top seam of the ruffle piece, you are also going to finish off the bottom. I've done this by baby locking the edge to make it a little bit more of a rustic cottagecore feel, but you can of course hem this if you want to, or zigzag stitch if you want a more rustic look like this. To connect the ruffle piece to the skirt, you are going to sew a long gathering stitch across the whole top of the ruffle piece. What you can also do to make it a little bit more easier on the gathering is to part the skirt into 8 pieces by just marking about halfway, and mark this again on the half point so that you separate the skirt into 8 equal parts. That makes it a little bit easier when you are sewing the ruffles to the bottom of the skirt, because then you will just gather and sew one panel for each of the quarter of the skirt. Then I'm going to find the next panel and I'm going to pin it where I've marked one of the 8s of the skirt. I'm not going to pin all the parts together at once. I'm just going to gather and then ruffle it a bit as I sew, and then do the next part. Repeat this 8 times until the skirt is finished. There is not going to be a ton of ruffles, and you're just going to keep pinning where you've marked and pulling the thread until the gather is distributed kind of evenly, and keep sewing. And then lastly, you're just going to remove all the gathering thread